Good morning, all. What a fabulous start we've had to today's session, right? And I'm going to pick up exactly from where Pratap left us. The best way to predict the future is to create it. And the future, along with the Yuva students, is also in the hands of the school students who will actually be driving climate change policy, advocacy, and action over the next 50 years. They are the people that we want to build a better climate and a better environment for. Keeping that in mind, good morning, all. Welcome to the second session today of this Climate Action Week, which shall focus on climate change in classrooms. At YI, a large part of the work that we do, that we undertake, is oriented towards social nurturing of children so that we can create empowered children who can create meaningful, impactful, and positive change at all levels, be it locally, nationally, or regionally. This is all about creating climate change leadership. How do we empower the children to not only be aware, but also tackle climate change problems that are prevalent today? The start of this happens by bringing in the conversation around climate change to our classrooms to understand how may we go about with it. We have our three panelists for today. Please join me in welcoming Heeta Lakhani, the founder of the ClimAct Foundation. We are also joined by Akhilesh Arunkumar, who is the managing director at the Bring Back Green Foundation, and we will be in some time shortly be joined by Srishti Singh, who is a climate change consultant at the Center for Environment Education. Till then, welcome Heeta, welcome Akhilesh. So glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you. It's an absolute
Thank you.
pleasure to be here.
Same.
Super, fantastic. So, in schools, whenever we go about with conversations, problems are always highlighted, with solutions, not so much, right? What we will try to do and what we will try to establish over the next 45 minutes is come out with three or four actionable solutions that young Indians can take forward through the Thaler networks, where we have lakhs of students and thousands of schools in our scope, in our network, and start bringing this conversation around, right? That would be the entire objective of our conversation today. I will not go into a very formal introduction of yours. I think your work speaks for yourself. So if I could invite you one by one, Heeta, if you could just get things started, we can have a 7-8 minute share from your side about the works that you do, the experiences that you've had, and how can we drive climate change into classrooms, followed by Akhilesh. Thank you so much and welcome once again.
Thank you, Tarang. And well, to get started, I need to go back a little bit. I was interested in climate. I was interested in the environment, but I think it was around the age of 11 or 12 when I heard the term environmentalist. And I said, okay, this is what I want to be when I grow up. And of course, I had no idea what that meant, what that sort of implied. But that was where sort of the seed was sown. And I started looking at different kinds of things. I started looking slowly when I was looking at career options. I started looking at it in a very different manner. So I did eventually do a master's in environmental studies. And through the course of the master's, of course, there were a whole bunch of different things that we looked at, different kinds of areas of focus. But I would say that I formally got inducted in the process a year after that. In 2015, I was, I got the opportunity to be at COP21, which was in Paris. And the more that I sort of engaged through that process, after that, when I stayed in touch, when I joined the youth constituency, which is known as Yango, it's basically a mechanism for engagement of children and youth. And the more I sort of involved in this space, there were a few things that kept coming back to me. One was the lack of young Indians in the space that you see very frequently. There were young people from different parts of the world, but not so many young Indians that engaged on a very regular basis. They used to be there at COPs, they used to be there at sort of the meetings, but not really engaging in the space, trying to see how we can influence it. And the second was really more international, more global, in terms of when you want to bring youth voices into these kind of processes. There are a few things that you need to understand to be able to do that meaningfully. And unfortunately, because the process is quite intransparent, because the process is complicated, young people tend to get frustrated when they come in, and then they tend to drop out, which sort of leads to a lack of engagement in the international space, which also leads to then not having the sort of continuity, because you just have new people coming in and going out, coming in and going out, and that sort of doesn't lead to the impact that you need. So these are two things which led me to eventually start what I'm doing currently. One is the ClimAct initiative. It's focused on climate education in India. And the aim is, of course, to bring together the knowledge that, or the current processes that exist internationally. How do you simplify them? How do you bring them? How do you ensure that climate education is accessible, is understandable, is simplified, and action oriented? What we study in textbooks even today is problem oriented, is quite outdated, really talks about problems that happened at least 20 years ago and not really what is happening today. So, how do you change the narrative to really move from problems to solutions, move from learning about environment as knowledge to really moving towards action? That is a big part of what I do. And the other focus is more at the global level, where we've tried to see how do you ensure that youth are part of the processes where these decisions are being taken, right? There's a moral obligation, of course, that young people need to be at the decision making tables because these decisions affect their future. But there's also succession planning. There's a national imperative where you need to have countries really don't think about succession planning when it comes to such crucial international negotiations. It's usually, of course, a top bureaucrat, and then sort of the list goes down, or the minister, or whatever that looks like. So there really isn't a thought process in how do I bring in the next generation to really lead on from what is going to be left. So there are a few different reasons why we started the program. This is known as the Youth Negotiators Academy. And the first program is the Climate Youth Negotiator Program, which focuses on working with governments, changing narratives, to bring governments on board to then ensure that they will have young people as part of their delegations. And these young people are trained, are built, their capacity is built. They're going to be ensured that they understand the negotiations to be effective negotiators. They will be representing the interests of the countries. They will be negotiating on behalf of the countries. They will not just be there as support staff, note takers, observers, whatever that looks like. So these are the two different areas of focus, focusing broadly, of course, on in relation to young people, but really moving from being in the backseat to taking charge and taking action.
Thanks, Heeta. Thank you so much for that brief yet very crisp sharing of your experience. Srishti has joined in. Hi, Srishti. Morning.
Hi, good morning, and I'm really sorry about the mess, but let's take it ahead.
No worries at all. So I believe, Srishti, we have you for a very short while. So Akhilesh, I'll just ask Srishti to come in right now. She's here with us for a short time, and then we can circle back the conversation to you. Okay? Yeah.
Sure, sure.
Srishti, yeah. Thanks, Akhilesh. Srishti, all yours. To talk about the work that you do at the Center for Environment Education. I know you're a massive advocate for local-based adaptation and participatory engagement, and that is also something that WI really focuses on, the grassroots, right? So for the next 8-10 minutes, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tarang, and glad to see Heeta and Akhilesh with me here. And I'm sorry if you're hearing some disturbance, but I really can't help it. So I'm representing the Center for Environment Education, who was established by the ministry and has been continuously working on how environment education could lead to action. So earlier, based on the ministry's priority, that time it was environmental education, then it became environment education for sustainable development. And right now, as an organization, I guess not even as an organization, as a citizen, we are trying to, put more focus on climate change education so that it leads to action. Uh, so, so, based on that, I have to. We have been working at the implementation level, at the policy level. Yeah. So we have been working at the implementation level, at the policy level, at the research level, and have been Tarang, I'm really sorry. I'll have to. Sorry, I'm. Can I get back to you in 10 minutes?
Sure, Srishti. We can work that. Akhilesh, you're on the spot. I know I gave you I know I gave you 10 minutes to probably collect your thoughts in, but knowing your body of work, I think you could just start off. Uh, a youth leader, policy advocate, Akhilesh, for you to share your experiences, would love to hear your works on the Kerala reforms that you've been working towards, because that is an integral aspect of our today's discussion. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tarang. Thank you for having me. I would like to share my screen, if that's all right. Um,
Sure.
so it's basically just some pictures. I think it will give a better clarity on the things that we have been doing. So, hi everyone. I represent Bring Back Green Foundation. Bring Back Green Foundation is something that I started exactly 3 years back, and we have been working in the space of climate education also in that span of time itself. So we are a group of young people who started an organization, and it really matters to us, climate education as well. So because one of the reasons why I started the organization, or one of the reasons why I started coming into the space of environment and climate change, is because of the lack of proper climate education that I received in my schools, or in my education system. The current education system is really archaic, and it, as Heeta mentioned, really not exactly touches upon the issues that we have right now, let's say around 10, 20 years back. And that's not exactly fitting for what we are facing yeah, as climate change and as a global issue right now. So it's a really fitting need. It's a really important uh, topic that we have to address at the moment that we implement climate education within our classrooms, no matter if it's just for schools and colleges. It sort of somewhere that impacts all young people. So we have to reach into all the spaces where young people interact, and we have to have climate education as something that's really important and something that's mandatory. I'll just go through, what we have as an organization have done in climate education for the past three years, and uh, give you a sort of an example of what we have achieved and what's something that's possible to be replicated elsewhere as well. Um, so these pictures are one of the reasons why we got, as an organization, started to work in climate education. So this was a session we had exactly around 3 years back with LP school students. So these are school students from the age of 5 to 8, and because we were just a young people NGO that started off in environment. Some people, sorry, is there someone on? Okay, thank you. So when we started, we got requests on taking sessions for students, like sort of having workshops to school students, and we did workshops and sessions for a lot of students in different age groups, for college students, for high school students, for students of all age groups. But what struck us the most was working with these small students, LP school students, as I mentioned, from the age of 5 to 7. We were not exactly very hopeful on what the outcome would be, but we tried our best to work through storytelling, visual videos, images, and that sort of thing to talk about climate change, the importance of waste management, waste segregation. Did some activities teaching them, one of the basic waste segregation that they could do in the classroom. And as I said before, we didn't exactly expect a huge turn of events after we take the session, because that didn't happen as well with older students. What happened here was, for our surprise, the students actually got so aware. They were actually pumping with energy. They wanted to make some sort of a change within what they were doing. From that day onwards, after we taught them segregation, each classroom had two bins where they properly started segregating waste, and the students itself started monitoring this. And another change that happened was after these sessions, they went back home and tried to impart this knowledge on their parents. So we got calls from the teachers saying that parents are calling right now saying students have are doing this very seriously, that they are even forcing parents to shift to steel bottle. They're completely stopped using plastic straws when they don't need it in shops. They're forcing their parents also to not do it. They're giving going ahead and telling their parents everything. And this was really surprising to us. This was, this gave us a motivation to actually start something serious in climate education. And sorry. And then what we did was we developed our own climate education curriculum. So the picture that you're seeing right now is part of a series of other sessions that we did, like sort of like a consultation or experimentation or understanding if the things that we did or offline could work online, because this was time during COVID, and we needed to establish that the methodologies that we're using could be working in both ways, and it proved right. We worked with young kids, and what we developed was well fitting and was working with people. So the first curriculum draft that we prepared was submitted to the former education minister in Kerala in 2019 December. And then the latest amendment, so we keep amending our curriculum, and the latest amendment of our climate education curriculum was submitted in the last World Environment Day to the higher education minister. During that period of time, we had conducted two major events as well. So one was the international conference in climate education. So this was the first time there was an international conference and a national conference on climate education, in the global space. We had like some amazing speakers, Kumi Naidu and a lot of other people talking about the importance of climate education and implementation of what we could do within climate education all across the world, within universities, within college campuses, and things like that. Uh, Along that, we did a capacity building program to train teachers. So this was very important. So, either we have a curriculum shift, or we cannot go to each classrooms as to do workshops and then expect that to carry on. So that's a really difficult thing. So as an individual, I could maybe reach 100 students at once in a one session, but as if I teach a teacher, and if I teach a teacher and give her the capacity on understanding what climate education is, what's the need for it, what climate change is, and she can take it, whatever subject that she's teaching, she has the impact to reach more students within her classrooms and within her reach. So what we did was we trained over 250 teachers. We gave them capacity building on climate change and various issues that's related to climate education that they have to know. And this is eye-opening for them also, because they are also getting to know about it right now, and then they can actually take it seriously within their classrooms. So we have a very lacking system within our textbooks, not exactly addressing climate change or like anything related to climate education properly at the moment. But if the teachers know about the importance, they might be able to address it a bit more deeply, and that seriously lacks in our education system right now, where we treat our chapters on environment as something that is not very important, is something that you could take home and read for yourself, not something that has to be addressed or discussed within the classrooms. And this is something that I have seen, and that still goes on, something that we have to change. That's why the climate education curriculum would be very important, and something we have seen the Kerala government taking up really positively as well. So, and that finally, I'd just like to talk about the yet another initiative that we have tried to pull out. So we developed a climate education mobile application. So it was launched by the minister itself, where we are trying to give free, accessible climate education to everyone, young people across India. And this was during the COVID time, because we wanted to not stop the flow of climate education in any way possible. We wanted to actually provide more access, provide a space where it's constantly being given out. So we try to build digital platform around it. We have longer goals surrounding this platform and so much more. Tarang, do I have more time, or should I wrap up?
You can take a couple of minutes, Akhilesh, and we will anyways have a conversation post this. So yeah.
All right, all right. So I just one more thing I want to say. This is sort of what the areas we are working in. We have done a lot within climate education as well. But I think something I really wanted to address is, we need to start taking our educational institutions seriously. They really have a lot of potential for making a difference. And I think that's something, a takeaway that we could do from this session as well, to your networks and those institutions. Because let's just consider it this way, just something that I go around telling everyone, that if you take a region, for example, or a city or a region, an educational institution places huge importance within the community that that institution lies around, and they have a sort of influence that is very underutilized at the moment. So if we can tap into that resource, so just imagine, so within a small panchayat, for example, a school or a college has thousands of people interacting on a daily basis or engaging on a daily basis within that place. You have, you know excessive manpower that is underutilized, which you could actually use for community transformation and community development. In the lines of providing climate education, that's something that we could use as an objective to actually bring community transformation through educational institutions. And how we can utilize that is by first providing climate education in a proper way, and then utilizing this potential of thousands of people being there at that space. So at least hundreds of them would be very likely to engage with us uh, in a thoroughly manner, and we can actually convert that into some sort of a climate action which impacts both the institution as well as the community. So that's something that you could look at, and that's something that's a very scalable approach as well, that we look into a bottom-up approach into uh, bringing community transformation as well as engaging in climate action. I could go on and talk about it more and more, but I'll just wind it up right now, and then when we have questions, I'll sort of discuss more.
Sure. Thanks, Akhilesh. Fabulous. And I think when you submitted your first draft to the government of Kerala, I believe you were barely out of high school yourself. So you truly embody what we are trying to talk about in terms of creating climate change leaders through classrooms, right? Heeta, I'm going to bring you in here because you have this domain knowledge, right? Everyone over here will be thinking, but we talk about environmental science in schools. It's been a part of our curriculum for 20-25 years. Since the judgment, everyone studies it, everyone's kids studies it. How is it different? How is climate change as a subject and education and what we are trying to do different from what is currently being taught in the curricula? I think there's a massive gulf, but for the general understanding, I think it just comes together. I think people use the two words interchangeably, but you know more than anyone else that there's a massive difference. Could you just highlight that, please?
Yeah, I think what you mentioned is true, right? We have environmental studies or EVS or whatever you call it in most curriculum across the country. The issue here is not about having it as a subject, not about having it that people are not aware or that they're not studying. I think there are two different kinds of issues or two different narratives that I look at it as. One is, of course, the subject matter, the content of it, but the other is also really the approach on how this is done. It's usually just given to any teacher, doing whatever subject. It's really not their area of expertise. It's really not something that they themselves are passionate about, which also translates into how it's being taught in the classroom, right? It is taught as something that you just read through, you give homework, you give them lots of different things to do from the textbook, and that's the end of it. And then, of course, there's the whole culture behind that. This is something is very traditionally there in the Indian, at least in the Indian context, where if you want to do anything with relation to the environment or social issues, you do it in your free time. It really is not something that you should focus your energies on, which also translates into what you focus on studying. You focus on studying maths and science, and you focus on studying physics and geography and history. But this is not given priority because in your life, you feel you're not going to use it anyways. So it's a whole different kind of approach. One is from the academic side of it. One is from the societal, when the parents are working with their children. And then is, of course, the curriculum, the content that they're actually studying. And this requires change in different directions, right? One, it's very hard to just say, okay, society should look at it differently. Absolutely, yes, they should. But how do we bring that change, right? And this can happen from the classrooms. Really, the approach of when teachers are given the subject to study, are they given the sort of resources, the tools, the knowledge that they need to know to be able to impart this kind of knowledge to the students? Are they upskilled? Do they understand the most recent things that are going on in the environment? Can they relate it to the different subjects in the classroom? Can they relate environmental studies to geography, for example? Can they relate it to science? What are the different kinds of things that come into play? And then, of course, is the curriculum in itself, which is, like I mentioned very briefly, but also what Akhilesh said is really talking about problems. It goes on listing the different kinds of impacts. It goes on talking about air pollution, water pollution, the different acts, which I think are very important to know. But beyond that, it really doesn't go into what can you do to be a part of the solution. It doesn't really enable children to understand that, I don't need to be 50 years old working in a government to be able to make change. It really doesn't give the kind of space which says, in my own home today, I can go back and do something. It doesn't show stories of change. It doesn't talk about actionable points. And I think when we talk about a subject which is so intersectional, it's not just the chemistry of climate change. It's not just the science behind why climate change is happening, but it's also how do you be a part of the solution? And people can be a part of the solution in different ways, right? You can want to grow up to be an architect, for example, but focus on the more green architecture, focus on how do you build more sustainably, what kind of materials go into building, are there different kinds of materials, are there different kinds of processes in the buildings that you can use? Or you can grow up to be, for example, a chartered accountant, but still focus your energies working with an organization or helping organizations that need the kind of specialty that you have. So you don't really have to be a social worker going out on the field with it. So the usual narrative is always that you're not going to get a job in the field, so you don't need to focus on this. You're not going to get anything. The only kind of image that the first thing that pops up is someone with a kurta and a jhola going out somewhere, trying to figure out what's happening. So this narrative really needs to change. We really need to realize that this is something that does not focus on one particular type of job. The job market is intersectional and it is changing over the next few years. There will be no job where the environment or where the climate does not coincide at some point in the next 5 years, 10 years. This is absolutely changing, not changing for generations to come, but in the generations today, by the time they're out of school, it's going to look very different. And we're really not preparing them in terms of what they should expect, what are the different kinds of things they should be prepared for in terms of skills. So there is a whole science of climate change, the whole history, the whole kind of more, nuanced kind of things that need to be incorporated. But in addition to that, there's also a whole intersectional approach which really needs to be brought to the forefront.
Thanks. That is true. It is something that requires a multi-stakeholder approach in terms of knowledge as well, in terms of domain expertise, as well as formal and informal participation, right? Like you said, it's just not about schools, but it's beyond that as well. There's an entire aspect of how we can reach out through the informal education systems. Akhilesh, you mentioned about the panchayats, right? You mentioned about societal groupings, etc., coming together to talk about climate change, right? How big a role do you believe informal education also plays in actually building something that is more conscience driven rather than, academia, which may be something driven very intrinsically towards scoring high, like Heeta, you said, EVS becomes a subject that I want to get a 90 plus in. But climate change is something I need to be aware of because even though I know of the environmental risks happening, I don't worry about it till the time it happens to me. That is where somewhere we think that informal education can play a massive part. Open to both of you to share your thoughts in the same as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with Heeta, and this is something I think I forgot to touch upon when I was talking as well. So intersectionality is something that's really being missed out. Talking about, so what we did with our curriculum is actually talk about a lot regarding intersections that exist and something that they need to know about. Big within classrooms as well as while you're trying to talk about climate education. So especially, for example, the intersection between gender and how big of a role that plays, and how big of a role that young students should be aware of, that they should know about. Um, and so I can relate to what Heeta was saying because I am a product of the failure of what EVS did in classrooms. So that's the exact reason why I got into climate education. The reason why I got into climate change as well. So it was a frustration over why this is not exactly being talked about, this why this is not exactly being addressed the way it should be. And what exactly happened in my classroom is very simple. So you have the 11th and 12th textbooks on science. In biology, you have the very last chapters that talks about air pollution and things, which is also very archaic and still. First thing, it's the very last chapters. So usually what teachers does is they'll finish everything slowly within their time, and then when you reach these chapters, they'll be like, this is not important. This is exact words that they use. This is not important. You can actually go at home and read it, or do at your own convenience and just let it be. This happened in 10th, I think 9, 10, 11, 12, all those years in high school. So this is a key time where you should be talking about this. And for example, there is something I could pull out. So this happened with within our discussions with some experts in the area of disaster management, and how we could actually sort of help uh, mitigate disasters within educational institutions, or how you could reduce the risks of disaster management within educational institutions through climate education. And he was pulling out some statistics which I cannot recall right now, but if there was a certain element of disaster management education, mock drills or things like that associated in the education system, and let's say that's based on, for example, an institution is in a flood prone area, or an institution is in some other disaster prone area, there is this huge percentage of risk that you can reduce on how the students can actually, the students or the institution or everyone can come out of the disaster, or come out of that warning pretty easily. And they could actually utilize that to help work with the community as well to mitigate that the risk associated with the disaster. This is just a small example, but this is something that's very important right now when you look at, for example, in Kerala, we see flooding on a yearly basis. And a lot of places in India, there is a lot of issues that's going on. And, while we look at education, it's so backward that we're not exactly addressing what's happening right now. If we really have to go deeply, we have to go into a localized approach where the modules are sort of actually talking about the general perspective, the global issues, and then actually what's happening in your local area and what you might be have to deal with in the future. If you're not going to if you're going to talk about drought to someone in a flood prone area, and then say this is how you're going to deal with it, you actually have to talk about what you're going to do if a flood is going to happen. How is that flood affecting you? Why is it affecting you in the first place? What did you do to the Western Ghats? What did you do here and there? What reports did you ignore, and how did we reach in the situation? And now how do you get out of the situation if that happens? So you really have to have all this hand in hand. And it places a huge importance, and the reason it's not getting that importance is really, really a big issue. And one of the reasons why we have to also focus on informal education systems would be because if this importance doesn't get addressed properly by the policy stakeholders, we really have to find other ways to actually engage with young people. Over the past 3-4 years, you have seen a massive movement of young people, and that has also uh, have its waves in India as well. There is a massive group of young people within India who is actually making an impact within the national stage as well as the international stage in the space of climate change. And if you don't exactly talk about their stories, their what they are trying to address, and a lot of other issues, it's going to be really difficult going further. So we really have to first have the importance placed on the formal education system, really put that effort, get them to rework on the curriculum. Everybody is ready to help, but with the what happened in 2019 was when we actually proposed that curriculum, that it was actually going to be put through and the SCRT was going to approve it. And that's when the national education policy rolled out, and it actually crippled out other private
Right.
players from actually taking part in the curriculum making process. It was at the exact time. So now we have to use back, back doors where higher education departments or the planning board or the environment committees to actually make some sort of change in the curriculum. But it's very important, so we still have to keep pushing and try to do it. Yeah.
Of course. So as we do that, right? And I said this entire conversation will be objective oriented, right? So Young Indians, through its network of schools and even into the rural areas, has a massive reach and access, right? And when we say that we believe children are change makers, that is something we genuinely believe in, because the examples that you cited of, children learning activities and taking it back to the parents is something that we've been seeing across our projects, across our other projects as well. Now we want to initiate the same with climate change, right? So tapping into both of your domain knowledge, again, that's what I come back to. How does YI, uh, how does YI come up with its outreach? How does an organization like YI? I'm sure there are other CSOs as well tuning in right now, right? How do we come out with our content that covers these aspects of climate change? How do we design those aspects, right? Because you've both done this. Heeta, you've done this at an international level and you have experience with Yango. Akhilesh, you've been doing it on ground in Kerala as well and introduced it into your career, into the school's education systems, right? So how do we go about designing these contents? What are the key factors that we have to keep in mind, knowing that this is something that has to be accessible to all, and this is something that has to cut across demographies and geographies, right? Because it impacts everyone. Yeah. So how do we go about with that?
I think one is that to realize that we don't probably necessarily need to create new curriculum at the moment. There is a lot of content available. There are lots of different people doing different kinds of focus areas, looking at the intersectionality of climate, social, environment, all of that put together. Like Akhilesh said, they've worked with the government, with the Kerala government, to really try and bring this into the curriculum. So there is a lot of different material out there. The idea is just to try sort of tie it all together and sort of be the platter that puts it together and says, okay, these are the different things that we now have available. And I think organizations like YI or other similar organizations can have a lot of value in sort of, rather than reinventing, trying to refigure out what is the kind of curriculum that we should create, what are the gaps, what are the challenges, really put this together, bring together a sort of network of the people that are working in the different kinds of areas, and then say, okay, what are the gaps and challenges now? How do we put this together in creating a more comprehensive sort of outcome? Whether this is focused at schools, at colleges, at whatever level that might be, right? So just trying to
Right.
see how you can be the enabler rather than trying to have to figure out everything all over and like reinvent the wheel in that sense.
100% agreed on that point. To trim it down even further, to make it very specific. Now let's talk YI and ClimAct and YI and Bring Back Green, right? How do we work together to take this out? YI can be that force multiplier for you, So how do you see, and what is that pain point that you think needs to be taken care of? Is it capacity building? Is it a general outreach? Is it a mindset block? Because that is also something that is very, very important. We are really talking about a change in mindset, right? So particular to your organizations, without reinventing, how do we act as force multipliers and actually take this ahead?
All right. So I think there is a lot of ways where we could actually do a lot of things. And something that Heeta said is really important, where we have to stop, reinventing. We have to actually work with what we have right now, and actually try to make more impact. Have more reach, and then have more impact. Uh, as young Indians, you have a access to a very big network, so that's really hard to create for organizations. So that's something that we could all tap into. I think ClimAct and DBJ, everyone can really tap into, and something we could actually think about making a huge difference. So uh, we have multiple options to work with. So depending on the schools or colleges, capacity building is one thing. It's not just what I would say is let's dial down maybe awareness part a little bit, because we can do awareness, but let's have a bit more impact driven and a climate action driven sort of an approach. We I wouldn't say we have reached a saturation point in the range of awareness, but we have a lot of awareness that's going out right now in terms of everywhere. It's not accessible equally to everyone. That's something to be addressed, but still, there is a lot of awareness that's going out, and with a lot of things that's there. Um, but along with in the lines of awareness, we really have to start focusing on having some sort of impact, and that's the sort of plan that we have to draw on how we will be engaging with the networks. Capacity building for teachers is something I have mentioned before, and something that we could really think about, because it actually makes an impact. Let's say 100, 250 teachers that we could teach right now, maybe teaches thousands of students. In our 3 years of operation, we could only reach up to around 10,000 young people or students, but those 250 teachers could actually have reached more young people as of now. That really makes a difference. So we could focus on the teachers. We could focus on an intersectional approach, and on what sort of intersectional and impact driven approach on what we could do within your networks. And I think we can draw plans on what we will be able to do. I would suggest capacity building as one thing. The next thing is to I'm not sure how much of a possibility we can have in tying down all these institutions together, and then having a sort of a replicable plan implemented in these areas. It depends on what sort of capacity you are looking at and what sort of capacity we'll be able to engage with. But we can hundreds of suggestions in what we can do in terms of education institutions, and I can keep on talking as well. But if depends on what's possible, I'll be able to suggest as much as needed.
Sure. Thanks, Akhilesh. Heeta, coming to you. There can be a lot. Give me two of the most important and most urgent key areas, and owing to the paucity of time, we have a minute. Just give me two immediately actionable areas that should be taken up from your perspective and from your entire experience in this field.
Yeah, I think I'm going to piggyback on what Akhilesh said. He's touched some very important points. Really, I think using the sort of network that VIA has, or in general, that larger organizations have a different kind of outreach. The key angle. Sorry. The key angle here is really collaboration rather than reinventing and trying to figure it out yourself. So organizations that work with children, with schools, with colleges, whatever that sort of age group, or with teachers, can really sort of be the sort of vehicle through which this can be carried out. So different kinds of, whether it's teachers trainings, whether it's capacity building of students, whether it's very specific areas like focusing on local issues in different parts of the country, trying to simplify what climate change is. What does it mean for me living in a city like Bhopal or in a city like Bombay? What does climate change mean? How can I be a part of it? Two, also then moving out to tier 2 and tier 3 cities, right? So the whole aspect of moving beyond just the traditional education model to how do you make this a little bit more part of your day-to-day being?
Absolutely. I think,
Tarang, if I may just add to that. So one thing, if you want as something solid, is like I'm not sure how much that works within your capacity, but what we are doing right now with the state government is we have planned on a program to actually have selected number of students. So we are planning to engage around 1,000 students all across Kerala, and we are going to work on our curriculum, and maybe in terms of what we could do, maybe we could work with ClimAct on the content that they have and something joined together, and actually train these students in a way that it's not just for a short term, like in terms of a workshop, but actually they take that back to their institution, and then they actually that's where it begins. So training is just very scratch of it, but then once you have trained them over a course of, let's say, 5 days, 10 days, they take back that to their institution and then they start the work. So then climate action starts within their institution, and then one thing we would obviously need is to monitor that. But I think if we could do,
Yeah.
then that's also something that we could look in the long term. Yeah.
Fair enough. No, I think that is something that the climate action team at Wire will definitely look at. Akhilesh, Heeta, thank you so much for joining us today. I think it's been a really enriching conversation. Both of you are youth leaders in this field, and we really doff our hats to you for the efforts that you're trying to do, and wish you all the best for your future endeavors. Akhilesh and Heeta, thank you so much for joining us today.